Good evening, everyone. I, Councilmember Walsh, Chair of the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee, call this meeting to order at 6:43 p.m. I will note we are doing this with generator power. You will probably not get video of us and various things, because the lights and shadows and all of that. But we're still going to promote building investments in Issaquah, and that'll be great. So tonight's meeting, I am joined by Deputy Council President Zhang and Councilmember Nichols. And our first order of business is public comment. And I will note, we have a member of the public here with us. And so let's see, are you maybe gonna stand? Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to do you at the base there so that we're using. So I am going to turn my mute off or my microphone off. Yep. And so if you will start by stating your name.
Rachel Mazer.
And your relationship to the city or anything that you are here about.
Sure. And just to confirm, the mic is a computer. Thank you. Don't need to gesture into that. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Mazer. I'm a land use attorney at Hillis, Clark, Martin, Peterson here tonight, representing a group of developers deeply invested in the Issaquah community. Can I get started? Is the time running? Great. Okay. Our coalition of housing developers and stakeholders prepared a comment letter that was submitted earlier today for your review. For ease of reference, I have printed copies of that comment letter here tonight if it would be helpful to inform your discussion. In lieu of restating that letter verbatim, I'll be brief with a few highlights. I'd first like to convey the coalition's thanks for the city's willingness to consider and remedy the challenges of housing development in Issaquah through the PBI program and the corresponding work plan. This is difficult work which requires thoughtful analysis, grappling with the current state of development in the city, and identifying solutions which will promote housing and yield real change. City staff has been meaningfully engaged in the development community, and this is reflected in the work plan. I'd like to reiterate that every single item on the work plan is crucial to the success of the proposed changes. For housing production to remain the priority here, the work plan cannot be abbreviated. Instead, we offer a few requests to strengthen the work plan, which will yield more housing for Issaquah. First, we'd like to thank staff for prioritizing the amendments to the MFTE program and encourage the PDE to retain the higher priority level of this highly impactful work. Second, we ask that the city reprioritize the, quote, ways to mitigate redevelopment if close to / within paved buffers to increase developability, close quote, that item, so that it's slated for council action much earlier than September 2027, which is when it's proposed right now in the current work plan. Third, we request that the, quote, right size impact fee reform effort advance earlier than the end of 2027. We understand that the city plans to engage an outside consultant, and we encourage the city to explore options to engage that consultant earlier so that this work can begin and while staff, and it can run concurrently while staff processes other reform items. Finally, we ask that the city add amending vesting regulations to the PBI. Providing an earlier vesting point similar to other jurisdictions will remove significant risk that code amendments adopted during city review will not kill a housing project. This certainty is needed to commit capital to project design and entitlement and ultimately bring more housing to Issaquah. Our letter further expands upon these comments, and we're also available to meet with you to answer any questions that you might have. If it would be helpful to flag questions that we could follow up via written comment, we're happy to do that as well. We're committed to participating in the public comment process for the PBI and the work plan moving forward. And we really appreciate staff's sincere efforts on this and your efforts on this important work. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. everybody's going to have to deal with a little bit of mute, unmute, all of that. So that is our only public commenter in person. And then do we know, I assume there's nobody online?
No, there are no members.
Okay, great. Moving on with our meeting, we have approval of the minutes from the March 17th meeting. And so I'm looking through. The minutes were distributed to the committee in advance. Are there any corrections? No? Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. And the next item of business is the only agenda item tonight, which is COM 0238, promoting business investments in Issaquah, presented by Director Dollywall, Community Planning and Development. I will.
Members, and I will, given the circumstances of having no power, I will quickly run through the PowerPoint because I think you all have seen it. So we have more time for discussion. Let's see. So we're here tonight to receive feedback on the goals and outcomes of the work plan that Council had previously established for 2026 and 2027 based on our discussion with Council and the full committee of the whole in March. At that meeting, there were 7 items that were prioritized to be put on the work plan. Following the same model that we had for Title 18, we've taken a stab at creating these goals. One, to get clarity from the committee and Council so that as we start this work with Planning and Policy Commission.
Just process question. Do you want us to go through the whole net first, or just like the questions?
I wanted to get into the individual
points.
Yeah, into individual priorities.
Okay.
If you have something.
Oh no, I don't on this. I just wanted to know.
Yep. Thanks.
So the umbrella goals really for this effort are to transform our urban core, commercial core of 900 acres into a vibrant, sustainable, walkable urban center, to remove barriers, streamline processes, and create incentives and promote development. Some of the key strategies that we've focused on are removing regulatory barriers, improving permit processes, and incentives, including proactive investment marketing. So now we'll get into each of the 17 items and what the goals are and what some possible actions we can take for each one of them. And as per your initial discussion, I'll pause after each slide and then we can go through the discussion with that. So the very first one is outdoor amenity space requirements. So the overall goal is really to get a balance between having these outdoor amenity spaces with development feasibility. It is to be recognized that amenities like rooftop decks, patios, balconies, plazas foster community and enhance quality of life, facilitating connections among residents and creating a sense of belonging as we transform our suburban areas into denser urban environments. So some of the possible actions here are reducing the private balcony requirements. I think that's the feedback that we had received from the development community. Eliminate the need for frequent deviation requests. So make it an outright code provision instead of having someone to request a relief through a deviation process. And also, it has come to our attention, when there are existing buildings that are trying to convert into a residential use, for instance, the Motel 6 property, where we had updated our code to grant some flexibility for those kind of conversions based on the state bill that was passed. However, the open space requirements are still difficult for those kind of conversions to come into play. So we're taking that process through a variance process. But since we were touching this section of the code, we would like to include additional flexibility for affordable housing conversions where you're going from a commercial to a residential use. So the schedule for this item, actually, since we had this aggressive 2-year work plan, we have started off. Planning and Policy Commission had a few meetings on it. They held a public hearing, and it's coming to this committee in June, early June, for your discussion and a recommendation to full council. So I will pause here before we go to the next.
Should I turn this? Okay,
Sure.
yeah, we can do this as a backup. Okay, I guess so. Has this gone to PPC already, and what is their recommendation, if any?
Yeah, so this. And at this point is to reduce the private outdoor spaces from 50% of the units to 30%. And then the 100 square feet per unit stays the same. Previously, we had built in that flexibility that council had adopted to go from 100% to 50%. But then you still had to count your 50 square feet for private space and add some additional common space. So that is struck out. So your common open space is only 100, not 100 plus 48 for the 70% that you're not going to have balconies. So there's a reduction in that as well as 30%. And the other ones, it's not a deviation, it's an outright code provision. And then also there are flexibility for converting commercial building into a residential use.
Okay. Reasonable, I guess. On the balcony requirements, I mean, I don't know what the right number is necessarily. I would just say to the extent that, you know, we want to give people the option to potentially pay less to rent an apartment that doesn't have a balcony, we should give folks that option. You know, I live in a townhouse that has a tiny balcony that I never use. And so, you know, I would say I would be okay with reducing the private balcony requirements to zero. And if folks want to put in balconies and, you know, some folks are willing to pay more, then I think that's also fine.
Would really like to understand how much a balcony costs. One of the response to this that from my questions earlier was that balconies on 1/3 of units are not a problem. Just because something's not a problem doesn't mean it's a good idea, though. So, or it's necessarily optimal. So, I know this is a requirement we've added in recent years, but there are many apartments in the city that don't have any balconies at all. I think they're still lovely apartments. So, I would also be in favor of at least having, again, presented as a bookend for something else for us to debate whether we want this to be a requirement at all. It does add cost, and it's something that people have to pay for, and they may not necessarily use it. I have also had apartments that have had very tiny balconies that I never used, but I had to pay for anyway. So I would second Deputy Council President Zhang's comment there.
Will make my comments here.
I want to start out with
just a
little bit of a quibble with the idea of the way that we've presented some of these issues and goals and objectives. I still want to center the community on this. And so it feels like, yes, we're looking to create opportunities for buildings without as many barriers. But the way that I would think about the outdoor amenity space requirements is find a way to provide residents with meaningful outdoor amenity space, which doesn't present a barrier to development. And I have all this written down. I can send it over to you guys. But I want to make sure that we still center the needs of the community, especially in these areas that I think the community had expressed was important to them, which is outdoor amenity spaces. That being said, I don't think personally that balconies are meaningful outdoor amenity spaces. And so I will agree with the committee members that I would be fine considering that going down to 0, and understanding that there are other opportunities out there to provide meaningful outdoor amenity spaces for people gathering, and things like that. I would also say the other thing that balconies do for a building is they provide a little bit of visual differentiation. And so I want, as we go into some of the other areas, which I think Councilmember Nichols mentioned in one of his emails, things like the step backs and the transparency and the design standards, all of those are trying to get at a concept of more variability and visual interest in buildings. And so this could be one where I would see a list of options. And one of them could be balconies as a way to create some variability in the building. But I don't know that I find it meaningful to require balconies even at a 30% area.
Balconies and what they actually are. The one thing that they indisputably are is a cost. Where the benefit is, here they're listed as an outdoor amenity. Given what these things actually are in most apartments as they get built, I also debate whether they're really an outdoor amenity. I think they're the folks that like these things. I think you're right. I think they like them for visual and for aesthetic reasons. And if we're going to mandate some increased cost in housing for aesthetics, I think that would be something that would be good to bucket all together and to be clear that that's a cost for aesthetics, not conflate it with what's really a social goal.
So if you want to strike out the 30% to 0, you'll have that opportunity to do it. And finally, the city council will make the final decision, as you know. But at the higher level of the goal is what, at least for the other ones that we haven't started the process with the Planning and Policy Commission, the idea here is that we are moving in the right direction. So Planning and Policy Commission has some overarching direction from council of what you all are thinking. And in that, so it becomes a useful tool for the commissions, for the community members as it comes forward for a final debate and discussion at your level. But this one, like I said, because we had to start on this work plan in order to get this done by Q2, we started early. The specifics of that, but any feedback you have of the goals, I think would be helpful at this point. And then in terms of the possible actions, probably not so much as the specific of that, which you'll have a chance to debate that and on that policy, but staying at a level where you tell us is this where Planning and Policy Commission should focus their attention on would be helpful for us.
Planning and Policy, you can say so.
Yeah, it'll come to you in June. The exact specific thing that they recommended will come to you in a few weeks.
I guess I just want to make sure that so we are talking through possible actions tonight, and I think we're being pretty specific. I want to make sure that we're not just talking about tweaks on a goal for PPC for everything that's already happened. So, right?
Correct. So this is a little bit of an awkwardness because it has gone through the process. But as we get to the other parts, they haven't started the work. Then we're seeking feedback on both.
Okay, but we are recording the. So we've we put down some clear possible actions here that I think we want to see some movement on. Those are still being taken into account, right?
Sure. Yes. And then for full council, as they look at the goal, if you want to make tweaks to the goal for full council to take into consideration for these items that have already made their path from PPC.
Okay, so I guess my tweak on the goal would be
the goal as written is almost all of the words are on benefits of these various amenities, and we're not really thinking about the costs very much. We have 2 words on that out of what's maybe 30 or 40 words. I think it would be useful to better emphasize that all of these are costs that increase the price of housing for people. And that's something we have to bear costs
and anything that we are deciding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I also think from the perspective of outdoor amenity space and creating community, I mean, I live in a townhouse complex that has community space that is just like not used. And so I think, from the perspective of how do we want to create community in our city, I really think a lot of it does come down to public parks. And so, I do think the outdoor amenity space, there's various other benefits, but I think like relying on that to create a sense of community, that's not, at least to me, quite what happens in practice. So, and especially with balconies, I don't really see how balconies facilitate connections among residents and create a sense of belonging.
Well, it's talking about the common outdoor spaces too. It's bundled in. That goal is not just for the private, but the common.
Yeah, I think this goal is maybe like there's a lot of things being conflated here. Again, I don't want to spend too much time harping on this goal because I think in terms of the outcome that we're going to arrive on, I think we're generally aligned. But I do feel like, I think balancing the requirements for outdoor amenity space, which provide quality of life, with cost of housing, I think that's kind of the.
So you'd strike down the rest of the benefits of the thing and then stick with the first sentence but just make it a little bit more clear about the development feasibility to say specifically cost.
Yeah, I think it could be outdoor amenity space requirements, which, enhance quality of life, balance cost of housing.
Okay.
Well, the proof of Painted Energy is very impressive. You're all here still meeting.
Well, we're impressed that they're here.
That's the flashing lights.
Yes.
I'm gonna just put my own piece out there. I think the goal and objectives that recognizing that shared amenity spaces are useful and giving examples of those is a good part of the whole piece of it. So I would like to keep that sentence in there. I think in the issues section, I would say one of the issues that I would see is balconies aren't utilized at high rates and don't necessarily provide meaningful outdoor space for individuals. The cost is an important thing to put in the issues section. And then the other piece is sometimes balconies are used as the variation. And so maybe they're looking for different ways to solve that. So maybe just recognizing some of the downsides of relying on balconies as the outdoor amenity space of choice. Okay, are we ready to go on to the next one?
Yeah. So this is the next one, step back requirements. So this is also in the same process queue as the previous one, which is public hearing has been held. PPC has already made their recommendation to this committee and is coming to you for full debate on June 2nd. Some of the things, the goal here was to reduce multiple step back requirements, but still achieve the goal of architectural interest and with a focus on public realm. So along the street, public streets. So here, what the PPC has recommended is eliminating multiple step backs, also eliminating them along natural context areas, but only requiring them along public streets. And then there's some flexibility in the location of the step back. So it could be as low as second floor, and it has to start at sixth floor. So there was a fair amount of debate and discussion with PPC on that, where should start, how much flexibility to give, but that's where they landed on their recommendation.
I think the overall goal here of architectural interest along the public realm is good. I would maybe broaden that to say visual interest along the public realm, not just architectural. And I think, to me, if you're walking around in a city that we generally believe to be very beautiful, like, Barcelona, they don't have step backs, really. And so I think, but what we do have is, very, very high quality building materials, art, plants, all that stuff. So I think if our overall goal is visual interest in the public realm, I think, and maybe we're going to get to this later in the architectural design standards, but like we should say, hey, here's a list of 10 things that we think all look good. And you can pick a few of these to make your building nice. It could be a step back, or it could be you have a mural that's made by artists, or you can have some high quality facade materials like bricks or some kind of wood siding, maybe. But I do think giving more flexibility to do different things that look good would be great, because I do think like what you see in a lot of cities is just like this sameness where it's like, okay, everyone has to so they all have the same place, or they all have the same facade modulation or something like that, because they figure out what is one thing that satisfies all the requirements and they can copy-paste that everywhere. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid. And so I would love to see, and maybe at this point, I think the actions proposed by PPC seem totally reasonable. But I think when we get into the architectural stuff, maybe later this year, I think having a more holistic conversation about how do we treat all these different aspects of things that, provide aesthetic and visual interest and make Issaquah look perhaps better than some of our cities.
Yeah, I think that's
a really interesting and important point that the Deputy Council President just made, that I hope we really take into consideration. There's kind of a mental model shift there in terms of looking at things that are visually the aesthetic that we are trying to trade off the cost of those could all go into a single bucket. That's not how I think the current work plan is structured. That would solve even from just one slide back, which is that I think we had an agreement that balconies visual. This is another one where I have difficulty. I can't necessarily accept step backs are inherently good. I think it's a subjective decision of whether you like these things, whether you appreciate them, accept them, etc. So, as this is at the moment, I would say possible action for me, step backs would have to, and I would just add it anyway, come up to that point, but eliminate step backs entirely, not just multiple steps backs, but eliminate step backs as one option we could debate. If we want step back as one cost that we are willing to have for an option for a cost for visual improvement, I think that would be a good. This is an example of a thing that could be placed into a bucket of costs, where if you make it up, where we require some number of points, for example, and if you get those number of points, then you can pass. But it's a very different mental model from where we are now. For this, but as far as the slide itself goes, again, or one of the possible actions has to be just not tweak like this currently set up, but eliminating this requirement, full stop. And for us to debate that.
right? My feedback is somewhat in alignment with that.
In that, I think, much like the outdoor amenity space, thinking back, what is important to the community here? The reason I think the community wants step back, or that at least PPC and others that have had these conversations, is that they don't want very tall buildings right up to the edge, block out light, or more importantly, make you feel like you're enhanced in a space that's much larger. So I think from my perspective, one of the most important things there is to make sure that the sidewalk area feels centered. And so that, I think, can be accomplished by many things, including overhangs and other things that create a space that isn't just looming over an individual. So that might be a different model of thinking about what step back is they're proposed to try and achieve for the individual who is experiencing that building. I agree with the idea that this could be one of those in many options to satisfy multiple ideas. But I think generally, as I think the direction that PPC is going, as long as we can still include their potential for not having step back at all, is the right way. Anything else?
Okay. Or just one thing. I mean, if we're thinking about, adding so long, because most of the time when you're walking on the street, you're saying, you're not necessarily like walking around like this, which we're not on camera, so people can't see what I was doing, which is like tilting my head up. But around in Old Town where they have the little like awnings and things like that. I mean, that's something that in my opinion has a lot of visual interest and some might character too. I think that would be something else to be considered as an option if we're talking about aesthetic. And I think all of these are pretty cost effective compared to some of these other things we're talking about here.
So then a couple of items on this slide. Floor area ratio. This came about because in mixed use zone, MUR, we have a floor area ratio of 2, but nobody wants to do the development density bonus, which would actually result in more affordable units because they can meet that FAR of 2 by building buildings that are not as tall. So the request was to increase the floor area ratio in mixed use residential because we already allow taller buildings there, but there isn't an incentive for anyone to do. But we want to tag that along with this second more meatier discussion, which is how much inclusionary affordable housing, what percentage and what AMI we should have. How do we set up our voluntary affordability, which is under this density bonus incentive program? And then how do we layer that with multi-tax exemption to improve development feasibility? So some of the possible actions in this one, this hasn't started with the Planning and Policy Commission at this point. So feel free to amend as give us direction, what you think would be helpful for us to know from your perspective, but it would increase floor area ratio in MUR district and then establishing an MFDE program with right sizing these other provisions with the goal of, increasing affordable housing. So you're getting the tax break from public dollars and there's some incentive to get affordable units. Because you can do MFDE just for the first in the market provisions, which we do have Pioneer program and relaxed affordability requirements. But since then, the state law has been changed a few times with as you had shown us in your emails earlier about TOD zones, transit oriented development zones, which have baked in percentage for what that affordability requirement is with what type of MFDE. So we would obviously study that. something to keep in mind is that the floor area ratio in our urban core is already pretty high. So that would mean downzoning if we want to kind of get really creative with that, which generally, if it's an entitlement that the property owners have, you would take away the entitlement, and that's not always, done lightly. So that's sort of these two items.
Can you remind us what MUR stands for?
Mixed use residential.
And
Right.
Really where it is,
What is the standards in MUR?
or like where we would find it in the city.
It's within the central, is on the valley floor, but a little bit lesser outside of the urban core boundaries.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
this makes sense. I mean, I think if we
get
want to
affordable housing in the mixed-use residential areas, we need to make it so that you actually get a bonus. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with the inclusionary zoning, density bonus, FTE, calibrating that to the right level. I mean, we've seen with the Pioneer program, it's a kind of out of step with what neighboring jurisdictions required, and we haven't seen a take on that. So I think, given what we've seen in other jurisdictions, we probably have similar economics as far as rent, building costs, et cetera, to us. I think it would make sense to look at them and establish something that makes sense. I will just push back slightly. One thing that you said, which was that MFT being a tax break for public dollars. My understanding is that, at least in Seattle or other jurisdictions, with so essentially because in the state of Washington, we're only allowed to increase the amount of revenue generated from property taxes by 1% a year, excluding new construction. If there's a new apartment building built, that adds to the total tax base, and that would be, way less than 1%, because there's a bunch of other buildings in Issaquah, but happens that total amount of property tax collected could go up by more than 1%. And so that cost be shared by all other property owners within Issaquah. I think it may be not the case to study the FTE program, and it was like the cost is something like $50 household per year if it was fully built out. So it's not really a tax break for public dollars, it's more so it is going to result in additional property taxes to the general public, which we should clear about and concerned about. And if that's cost to additional housing is $50 per year, I think it's a totally reasonable cost.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So there's revenue foregone or not paid by the developer. So there is a tax break for the developer, but from a city's perspective, it's a tax shift to other property owners that are going to pick up that difference. You're right.
Sure. So when I think about floor
area ratio as a tool, I want to primarily be able to use it to establish a minimum density or a floor area ratio. I think that is the biggest part of that, using that as a potential tool, is making sure that land that gets developed is developed toward its highest and best use. So for that, I'm not quite sure if my set of goals would be about fixing the mixed use residential,
more affordable housing. So my
was making sure that we were utilizing FAR in appropriate areas of the city in order to establish the density that we are looking for. And so I would look for analysis from planning development just to see whether that is great that we found an area where the floor area ratio and the math is having problems. But that. And then on the inclusionary zoning and MFT. So, question here, do we want to pause and try and restart? Our electricity just came on. Do we want to pause and try and restart how we're recording or anything like that? Or are we continuing on? Continue on? Okay, fantastic. So my perspective on the inclusionary zoning and the multifamily tax exemption idea, I think everybody likes the idea of, growth pays for growth and all of these concepts. So growth creating affordable housing is good. What I would ask is, since the analysis, I forget the name of the Eco Northwest, since that analysis that we had several years ago has happened, there's been more articles about, hey, does that 80% area median income affordability, is that really best served by an MFT program in inclusionary zoning, or is it maybe being able to be served by the market a little bit? And so my feeling on, if we're going to give a tax exemption, then we want to make sure that we are achieving something that the market can provide. So my preferences for anything that we do with MFTE is really to ensure that if we are making a requirement of a user, that it do something that the market can.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we also have all these policies that were required by the King County countywide planning policies and the affordable housing, certification of a comp plan that looked at all of those things of what the cities can do to meet that deeper affordability requirement. So we have some work to do on that area, and MFTE is one of the tools the city can use to provide that additional gap in funding for improving feasibility for those situations. So, yeah, we'll certainly include that as a, yep. Mm-hmm.
So on MFTE, so my thoughts were that we should be as good as HB 1491. It would, I think, though, I appreciate this, that would require a good amount of work, but to understand what all of the MFTE requirements are, or MFTE programs are in neighboring jurisdictions, it would be nice to be at least as competitive as those are, or at least to understand what they are, to compare ourselves against them. So the other comments far, I'm Lord, so I won't repeat those, but at least on MFT, 1491, I know what we should be doing, but I would like to see what else is happening in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I mean, some of this comes from the state law. So you can do an 8-year MFTE and you don't have to have any affordability requirements. For a 12-year, the minimum is 20% at 80% AMI. The recent law change was, I believe, 20% at below 80%, up to 80% with a 20-year tax break, but that's permanent affordability. So it gets complex, but we'll do all of that full analysis as we take this project through, because the cities would still get the tax for the land value and any non-residential commercial portions of that building, but the entire units, if it's a 200-unit complex and 20% of those units are affordable, you get the tax break on the entire 200 unit. So that from a developer, you don't pay any taxes for 20 years on the entire residential units, not just the ones that are affordable. So we'll get into all of that as we lay out the different options, but we'll certainly include the 1491 option for sure. Okay.
Just in case you're curious, it was a squirrel. And they found the squirrel across the valley from the pole that he apparently met his demise.
It was really
Squirrel threw the squirrel 10 feet. So they found the squirrel.
Great.
Great.
I have it created by us. All right. So should we move on to the next slide? So this one is parking. And early adoption of the state law, Senate Bill 5184, which I think by email I kind of shared some of the highlights of some of these things. It's not as straightforward as just changing a parking table. There's going to be a few other things like ADA parking requirements that are currently tied to a percentage of the required parking. So if there's no parking, then how do we deal with ADA? So, all of that stuff will need to get sorted out. So some of the possible actions, obviously, whatever the state law requires, the other options are related to maximum parking requirements. So the code currently has maximums. They never come into play in our context, but we will present an option to keep it or to get rid of the maximum threshold for simplicity. So those are some of the things we are talking about, and I think I received comments by email from two of you to have zero parking for residential units in urban core and one other zone in central Issaquah. So we can add that as a point of discussion with Planning and Policy Commission. So when it comes forward to you, that you'll get their recommendation on where they want to go with that.
Yeah, and I just want to add the reasoning for that. We've heard from the builders that you've spoken to, which is that, all the projects that they're building right now have 1.25 parking units, but there are some developers, in other areas. For example, last year I had the opportunity to tour cul-de-sac Tempe, which is very, very cool. It's a very, very cool development, which is, it's famous as the first car-free neighborhood in America. They have this beautiful public plaza. It's like the most beautiful neighborhood with these alleyways. It looks like it's like straight out of Greece, except with the colors. It looks like it's in Arizona, which it is. And so I think if we want someone like cul-de-sac to come and build something really beautiful that happens in place with Issaquah, I don't want the existence of parking requirements to be a barrier for that. And so that's why I think, setting the parking minimum 0 in near where future light rail will be a great way to potentially attract those types of forward-thinking builders. I know most builders in the country are doing things that are not quite as unique, and they will continue to build parking. I will know also that Tempe is right next to a light station, and so we are getting light rail in Issaquah. I want to be able to have some of these forward-thinking developments, and I think moving our minimum isn't going to stop anyone from building if it's needed. I do think we want to have the door open if we are going to have potentially really amazing buildings in Issaquah. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, excited to all that. I know the executive
wanted to eliminate parking minimums. I want to be clear, not eliminate parking. That's a key difference, and it also goes to the statements about the ADA parking spots, et cetera, that are out there. So eliminate parking minimums, not to eliminate incentives. We will still have market forces that will place many parking places within incentives for adults. 100%. The utility of eliminating minimum is simply to allow and to advertise that we're trying to encourage some development opportunities. It becomes president's this is a site in Tempe, a good example. And as we build out, even as we improve capacity, hopefully our existing modalities here as well, these options will become more attractive to people, and we shouldn't prohibit them. So I want to double down on really insisting that we at least have this as an option to consider. I propose 2 zones. Just looking at the zoning map, I'm open to thoughts on that, but I propose urban core, which is approximately our regional growth boundaries, development agreements, so it's mixed use swap, which is area to that. But I'm not hard fast on I think what we really want to see is some area where we can see some developers we need to experiment with it, and was creative options. People that really like it and not have them be cost constrained by requirements that guys who might want there do not necessarily want to have to pay for transit opportunities that either are or will be them. And then just to restate one more time, none of us want to parking. That's not the goal. And anyone that is concerned about that, like if anybody's able to listen, I'm not sure if we're recording or not, but if anybody is concerned about that, that's not the goal. It's slightly reducing mandates for parking and allowing for some more creative opportunities to arise. And if it gets out of hand, we dial it back. But at the moment, in urban core popular, this is a zone where we have seen zero housing. In the past decade, we will hopefully break ground on development there very soon. Otherwise, so anything that we intensify in this area that we all want to see more housing build, I think is a good idea. This is something I think we really need to look at and see, at least within those for those of us who want to see the densest growth, the closest to our future transit, simply applying it. See what happens.
And I will add, all of the properties near cul-de-sac Tempe, they're all regular apartment buildings
with parking, and they're advertising themselves as being next to cul-de-sac Tempe, but with parking. So, for they're obviously building parking even though it's not required, and it's just interesting to see that. And so I don't think that this will necessarily result in all parking going away. It'll just, result in more choice for people to live in different types of environments, especially as we get light rail.
Sorry, one follow-up. Just on the ADA that itself too, because I know this has been it's coming email from all the people that are concerned about this. So the ADA, my understanding is that ADA supersedes anything that we would regulate. It's we have analysis of the ADA operator, but it's not parking spaces, and then there's still something ADA requires. I think that would be some useful digging you can give to us. That's my current understanding, and it's another reason why I'm not concerned about not any accessible parking, because as long as there's some parking, and I'm confident there will be, some of them will be accessible. What do you find?
Yeah, from a code perspective, it's in the building code, and it's a percentage of your overall parking that you're required to provide. And so and then the bill that actually, this particular bill has tasked the State Building Code Council to come up with other standards for ADA stalls, which they're not even close to getting that on the books. So if we are being the early adopters, we won't have that guidance from State Building Code Council on what those standards are going to be. So some of the cities that have done this early adoption have just kind of ignored the ADA parking requirement. So that's the discussion we'll have with PPC when we get to that.
Is it required or is it actually built?
No, it's required. So you have to have X percentage of, if you are required by code to have 100 stalls, you need to have 3 or 4, whatever the percentage works out for accessible. There's accessible van parking stalls, then there are accessible non-van, so for people in wheelchairs or otherwise. So
yeah, I understand. If we don't require it, but home builders still have hard parking units, they're still subject to ADA. Is that correct?
we could craft the ordinance like that. So however many you are providing, you still need a percentage of that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
We'll have to craft the language around that if that's the choice we want to make. Yeah.
So my feedback's going to go a little bit back toward the goals and outcomes chart. I think on parking requirements, parking is not inside to best use and generates negative impacts such as dirty stormwater, acidic dead zones, etc. as well as surface parking lots. I don't think this goes to the full understanding of the negatives of parking. I think, of course, we need to address the cost. This is a significant cost to home builders. This is a cost that many renters or people that are lower income cannot avoid because it is built into the cost of a unit when it is required. So I think that's an important element to put in there. I would also say that parking requirements in the past have often been arbitrary unless many areas are overparked, especially in retail. And parking lots create barriers for non-car users, such as pedestrians and bike riders. So I think those are elements that we want to include in there, as far as the negative impacts of having extra excess parking in our city. And then I will just say, don't think the state requirement is a goal. I think that's an issue. We have to create code that at least meets the minimum bar of the state requirement.
But we're early adopters. We don't have to do it for another few years, but we're choosing to do
Sure.
it. Yeah.
And if you want to state something around early adoption will help us get, additional development, I think that's a way of phrasing it that is an important reason why we would be going after that. And then from my perspective, the goal is like establish right-sized parking requirements that enable smart land use, easy access for all users, and ability for builders to make choices based on market. So I wouldn't necessarily goals and outcomes prescribe removing minimums or removing maximums or anything necessarily on that. I want to make sure we understand the cost to all users, the cost to the builders, and how we can envision something going forward.
Sure. No, I think we understand sort of the goal is to let the market determine what the right amount of parking is what I think you all are getting at. There are different ways. I mean, at one time, King County Metro had done right-sized parking model. That was probably, we could run the numbers to that, but it's probably going to be more than what the state law is requiring. The state law is 1.5 per multifamily unit. Most builders, given our location and lack of transit currently, people have to rely on cars. And so I think that's even with like the TOD project, some of the public comments we received were, where's the on-street parking in central Issaquah, right? So if you don't have it on your property, you need on-street parking. And so if not, then people will park on a vacant parking lot across the street and get to your, or if you don't provide all of that. So I think as the area transitions from an auto-centric to a more urban development, there are going to be some growing pains during that interim time period without transit until you get the transit and people can completely live car-free. So I think that's why it's important to kind of find that right balance at this time, because we don't want to have unintended consequences. I think the goal of letting the market determine what it is, what we learned was the market rate component for the TOD project wanted to go more than what the code required because that's what their own assessment was. And so to some extent, yes, the market will determine the right amount, what needs to be done. In terms of the removing of barriers, I mean, we have to remember where the city's code was. We used to require at least 50% of the parking stalls need to be structured parking. And that went away. That's no longer a requirement at this point. The number of units we're now reducing down to 0.5, half. One unit will only have half a car. The reality is for people to be able to go from place to place in today's terms, in the next, until light rail comes here or Metro provides more connections than one bus to Seattle, people will have to rely on their cars. So I think that's where our
Let me
balance is.
just break in here.
Yeah.
And I think all of that is great information to represent to PPC as they're going. I want to make sure that we are very clear that when we say there will only be half a car here parking, that's really the case. The minimum requirement of the state is only half a car per multi-family unit. The developer may choose to build more than that, depending on what their market analysis decides. But that's an important piece that I really need to make sure that we don't add extra concerned with this because what I've heard from many builders is if they don't have enough parking, they're not going to be able to get the loans to make that happen because a lot of the financial firms are very risk averse and don't want to invest in something that isn't going to satisfy the market need. So that's the first big thing. The second big thing that we really have to recognize is that we are whatever is built here is going to be around for more years. And it is entirely likely at that time period, as we have just seen a huge shift in e-bike usage, it's likely that we are going to continue to see shifts. Not only through gaining, light rail transit, but potentially other buses, or there's going to be other technologies such as e-bikes out there. And
shared
so,
rides,
shared car programs. And so one of my concerns then is that we make sure that what we are creating as a requirement that is essentially a barrier to more housing is really the necessity and is really what our community needs now and into the future. I don't know which one of you all is first. Okay.
I'll down on all that, and I do disagree with the assessment that everyone in our city requires a card to get around. I know many people who don't. I know it to be a false statement. So I want to better accommodate residents who currently do not have cards and those who would prefer to not have to pay for parking that they do not use. I don't know what the numbers are. I think it would be really interesting statistic to get better data on. I know this mostly anecdotally from talking to people, observing people, knowing how many of the folks in some of our affordable housing communities get around and what their trend modalities are. So I want to correct that as something that this body is clear on, is that this is, though we are a community that is largely since we are not entirely, and we should be cognizant of that and take that into account for our planning as well. So I appreciate the perspective that there will be many people who are dependent from it for a good long time. I myself utilize my car anytime I have my kids because we don't have a good bike infrastructure for being out otherwise with them. So I with that, but I also want to think about it as council member Walsh mentioned planning for the years ahead. We are going to more transit. We are going to get that rail. We're already confident with that, and we want to be planning around that. And also communicating to our partners in transit as well. So anytime this decision all come together and not have this be internally contradictory, where on one side we're planning for light rail and for mass transit improvements, other mass transit modalities to better incorporated in this law, but we still have the mentality that we have to have X number of cars per unit. I think that's leads to some model. And I'm also, again, to restate what Councilman Walsh said, I want to agree with the statement that just because we have minimum 5, that doesn't mean we're going to have. We will, on average, the market forces come in that will almost certainly be higher than that. So the goal with eliminating the requirements is not to say going to have zero, it's to allow additional opportunities when they creative builders come in and want to try to do something that people will almost certainly love, to allow them to do that and not restrict them to have to increase costs for people that don't necessarily want to have to pay for it or they can't afford to pay for it. So that's why I would insist this is something that we at least have as an option for debate. And I talked all the decisions that you brought up as far as accessibility as well, and where the market may land in reality. Those can all be true, and still have this as an option that we may want to pursue.
Absolutely. I mean, our job is to kind of raise the policy questions. Ultimately, you decide what policy you want, and if the council wants to have zero parking in the urban core, that's certainly a prerogative. We just want to make sure that all of these other things that we hear from our residents, that we are making sure those are, in your front. So it's the comments we received from the TOD project. People are worried that people are going to park in their neighboring lot, or a resident in a housing that doesn't want to pay for parking but uses the on-street parking. But when there's an impact to the on-street parking, they call the city and say, "Why is my on-street parking blocked? Because now I have nowhere to park. I don't want to pay my apartment complex for the charge that they charge me for parking." So those are all realistic things of how it'll play out on the ground. But certainly from a policy objective of removing barriers, if you want to go the route of having zero or let the market determine what those minimums are, that's certainly.
And the language is, it's not zero parking.
Yeah.
So no one is proposing zero parking.
Eliminating minimum.
Yeah, but it is.
City Administrator Bobkowitz.
Yes, and I appreciate the council's desire to goals now. And so I would urge all of us to focus on outcomes versus solving problems. That I think want to be thoughtful about language. Agree with Councilmember Davis 100%. The language counts. We want to be thoughtful about that language tonight. So I think in the interest of time, we'll continue to do that rather than provide after the report or feedback. Perhaps let's take all this in, and at the conclusion of the evening, we'll decide these in certain other discussion, or when we start doing the stuff we start with the city, rather than to have back and forth. Really appreciate the thoughtful comments. Let us absorb them. Rather than, that would be, that would be
Great feedback. And I think we can do that. Anything?
Yeah. One last, I think parking is a topic that, people have a wide range of opinions on. And I will say, I'm not going to solve all the parking problems through the land skirt, right? Like what we've seen in a lot of neighboring jurisdictions, and I do want to make this point, is like, even if they build a parking garage, a lot of people still don't want to pay the spot in their parking complex. The parking on the street is free, and a lot of times the parking enforcement doesn't come in until it's like a really major problem. People got used to parking on the street free. So I think we can get ahead of that. And as soon as the TOD is built, we should start doing we should have our patrol after doing parking enforcement early, so that it's not vandalized or park forever. And I think if we're able to get ahead of this problem, that will go a long way towards, people being on board with this, with our approach. I just don't feel like requiring necessarily in their parking garage when, it's like, oh, street for free, people are going to do it. And so I think if we're going to do this, have more different housing, we need to get ahead of this parking enforcement, because if you come later in searching, people really are not happy.
Thank you.
Okay, that's our next slide.
For two of them, transparency requirement along natural context areas. The goals provide flexibility. Possible actions eliminate or reduce this requirement. The other one is multifamily in this one particular zone. So the Senate Bill 6026 requires multifamily not wherever we allow commercial. We do in most zones except for this one particular one. So the goal is just to come into compliance with the state bill and then allow multifamily in this zone. I mean, it doesn't make any difference on the ground because the only property that's zoned that's redevelopment is shelter, and we've done that through the development agreement anyways. But other than this, we do allow multifamily in every other zone that we allow commercial.
Okay, so my thoughts on this is, my understanding is the transparency requirements were an issue on energy requirements, even outside of natural context.
Well, it's only come into to our attention related to the issue of natural context, but also in
We are looking at it citywide because even if you're in central Issaquah and you're not along a natural context area, you still have transparency requirements that have been difficult to meet. So we are looking at it at all three different variations that we have.
Great. Yeah, that was something that I wanted to make sure that we are able to convey. I was writing the goal with help builders, energy requirements, advocating for transparency, which provides eyes on the street and within a building. So I think there is still a way to convey that transparency is important, but not necessarily have as many requirements or as stringent requirements, because I think the energy portion of that is important. And I think most people who live in a building like windows, and thus builders build buildings.
Yeah, and I think it's a street level for the pedestrians and all that is a different thing than the whole tall building and what's the requirement on the upper floors. Because right now, the way the code is written, if you're next to a natural context area, the whole thing is 50%, and that's the problem people were having complying with. But we're looking at all of them.
Okay, I want to make sure that it's across everything. Councilmember Nichols?
Yeah, just to make sure there's the consensus of this is clear. Same exact comment. I think the goal should be provide flexibility and transparency requirements, and does it strike along in market areas?
Yeah, will do.
And one thing I will add is, I mean, with the transparency, personally, I've never really understood how this necessarily adds interest to the public realm. Again, I would much rather look at a mural than look into someone's private home. And so I think, again, I think transparency to me at least falls under the bucket of adding interest along the, ground floor. And so we can have it as an option, and maybe we want to require a certain amount, but if I'm thinking as I'm walking around town, what do I want to see? I don't think looking into someone's home is really what I want to be doing. So I would be in favor of additional flexibility on that.
Yeah, I think we distinguish between if you are a residence on the first floor, then you have to have it over 6 feet so people can peek into your windows and that kind of stuff, or you have to have stoops to create that interest along the street front. I think that it gets nuanced in that, but for the commercial properties, commercial storefront, it's the interest of people walking and seeing inside. But this one is really getting at the whole building, not just the lower floor. If you're next to a natural context, which in Issaquah, that's in a lot of places. So, but we understand it. We'll look at it all together. It'll come back to you in different areas where we have this requirement.
Yeah. And then, so I've seen in some other cities where they have the transparency requirements. If you have a daycare or something, then they basically put a giant wall inside the building fronting the window because you don't want people from the street being able to look in and see the kids necessarily. So that kind of, defeats the purpose of having the windows perhaps. So I think we should, think critically about what's the right way to do this if our goal is to have interesting things for people to look at.
And then the other one, which is the multifamily in the urban village commercial retail. I'm not sure. So SB 6026 requires cities to allow multifamily in all commercial zones. So we know we have to make that change. I guess what I would say is having retail as part of a denser, walkable neighborhood is important to create complete neighborhoods. And so I think you're saying we already allow residential pretty much everywhere, but
not as mixed use. So that is only along one street in central Issaquah.
Yeah.
So we used to have, you need to preserve jobs on a parcel by parcel basis, which was impossible to implement. That was taken out with the idea that we would have look at other ways to get mixed use. But, and now I think the discussion with the state legislature and others is that that's a drag on the housing. And so you shouldn't mandate commercial use on the bottom floor and all that. So we haven't taken that up in the work plan of expanding that area, but there's only one street, Mall Street, where it's zoned vertical mixed use, where we require that you have to have vertical mixed use. Now, of course, with the light rail station planning, and if we ever get to the point of doing the transit-oriented development planning, that can be looked as a subset of Central Issaquah area where we could have requirements for a mandatory vertical mixed use.
Yeah.
In the future.
I guess I agree with the idea that could be a future conversation, but I do think if we're going to go about implementing 6026, that it does provide a point in time of figuring out, are there areas where we really can't create complete communities that include and require retail? I will defer if we feel like it's too much for now, but I really feel strongly that an area that is just housing, A, cannot pay for itself, and B, isn't as livable. So, Councilman or Deputy Council President.
Yeah, and I'll just note the UV retail zone it's basically like the Grand Ridge Plaza in the Highlands plus the shelter holdings thing. So, I mean, allowing family in that zone to comply with the state laws. And I do think we can consider to what extent we're able to require some amount of counselor retail in that area as well. But I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on that point because I know it's on public center slides.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Self-certification of ADUs. So I think we heard some comments. Self-certification of ADUs. So I think we heard some thoughts from you all via email. So when we looked into it, there's this House Bill 1353 that talks about self-certification, which means someone has to hire a registered architect to design these plans, and then they can forego this whole requirement of getting code review from the city. However, we looked at some of the pre-approved programs which we thought maybe were more cost effective for people to just pick that up, and they don't have to go first find an architect who's registered in the state of Washington and then pay them because that may be more costly. Generally in the state, you don't need a registered architect unless you're building over 4,000 square foot structure. So these are small structures that we're happy to go the self-certification route if that's council's, this committee's desire. That's why we're here today, so that we don't go down one path and then you have a different vision for it. Either way, if it's self-certification or the pre-approved program, the issues that people are going to run into are not so much the architectural design, it's the utility costs. Where's the water? Where's the sewer? How do I hook up to that? How much does it cost me to hook up to that? The city already grants and exempts ADUs from impact fees. So that's not a problem. Council, when we did the middle housing legislation, asked us to keep an eye out for that. If there's an influx of ADUs, then they want to have the conversation about should the waiver be 50%, 100%, whatever the case may be, because the city still, I believe, has to make up some of that difference. But we haven't had an uptick of those, so we're not concerned. From a monetary standpoint, it's just which one is going to be better. If the pre-approved program hasn't been taken up by people, I suspect the self-certification one is going to be similar in results or outcome. But it is one thing we can certainly pivot whichever way this committee desires us to do.
So I've talked to a lot of folks from cities that have done the pre-approved program, and essentially it's like people want to have an AD more specific purpose, right? They're like, oh, I want my family member to live in with me, or whatever the case may be. And so people and a lot of people spending their own money or getting a home line of credit. And so if they're going to invest $2,000 or $3,000 into building this thing, they're going to spend their $20,000 to find something that's exactly what they want. And I think anecdotally, people don't want to do plans because it's not exactly what they want, or especially different lots. There's different things that fitting one it might not necessarily for your specific lot. I do think communication that gives people need to do their own design, but also still through the process. I also understand all the utility interconnections and stuff all still require city approval, but I think my understanding, having talked to folks that have tried to do meetings in cities, including Issaquah, also I think Seattle is just a lot worse of how difficult it is to get through the process. I think this is something that we should try to encourage more of. I feel like self-certification could be a good path to do that. So I would recommend exploring that option.
Similar feedback, both looking at a few of our neighboring cities as well as talking to some of the home builders that are out there, expressed that most of the pre-approved, the cities that have adopted pre-approved plans have not gotten much uptake from them. There's just enough barriers, especially in perhaps more rural area, like it's hills, etc. They end up working in even simpler areas. So I would also lean towards self-certification, towards the whole streamlining the process.
Again, back to the goals of the chart. I don't think there's enough details here about why the process is difficult. I think we recognize that the process is difficult because of the financial barriers and the utility barriers and things like that we can't solve. But I think it's also an information barrier, which, if you think about it, I think that's one of the things that people conceptually like about pre-approved plans is they feel like they can understand what they would be able to do. That being said, I do agree with my two fellow committee members that other cities that have done this and invested in it haven't seen much of an uptick. So I think recognizing what the barriers are to people is really important. And if we do determine that the barrier is the back and forth of permitting or having a hard time understanding what the code requirements are and things like that, I think there are different solutions than necessarily what is presented here. I think what is presented here is going to the idea, this as a concept was written as full certification of ADUs, not necessarily, why are we getting ADUs and what would we do to make adjustments. So I think it's more details in there about why ADUs aren't happening that are within our control. And if we're talking about streamlining the permitting process, I would like a wider selection of potential actions out there, including, better documentation or just really simplified requirements for height or, form-based code is something that people use as a way to, streamline concepts. I wonder if something like that, where it's the external portion of the ADU that is necessarily important, whether having focus in that way would be one way to improve the experience.
But out of the so you want a more holistic understanding of the barriers for not getting as many ADUs. Certainly, we can include that in the information moving to Planning and Policy Commission, and that'll come to this committee. Out of the two options, there's consensus to just proceed with the self-certification methodology for now.
No, that was not my feedback. I don't know anything about the self-certification and whether or not that would be used or anything like that. I do think there is clarity agreement among the groups that pre-approved plans have been well used.
Okay, so we don't need to spend more time going down that path.
I think I would agree on
Pursue
that.
the self-certification and removing other barriers that may help streamline the process. Is that fair? Okay.
And making sure that the rules outcomes chart really recognizes what those barriers are and other creative ways we might be able to improve the user experience.
Sure. So some of it may be implementation, some of it may be that. All right. So moving on, so quarter 2026, we hope to accomplish these things. Architectural design standards. So we have, the city had done a huge effort. This was not something that we tackled with Title 18 and kept it as is. However, some of the language in there is a mandate of here are the things you have to do and here are the things you don't need to do. And so the idea here is that we give those things that are a requirement to say these are menu of options or these are more like guidelines to meet the objective, which is stated in the code, as opposed to a specific design requirement of these 10 things you have to do and these 10 things you cannot do. That's how the manual is currently written. There are also, you have to choose one out of the 5 architectural styles, and each style has a specific thing. And we haven't heard much feedback from people as to that's a good or bad thing. Most people go towards the Northwest Contemporary architectural style, but I think this idea that these are guidelines to meet your intent will help satisfy a lot of comments that we've received on the architectural design standards. The second element on this slide is variances and deviations. So this goes back to before Title 18 update, we had a process called AAS, Administrative Adjustment of Standards. Anything under the standards could be modified, but there was no criteria. So it led to really arbitrary decisions and potential liability for the city to say, yes, you can do it, but you can't do it. So land use litigation gets very expensive. And so we want to make sure that whatever codes we put in place have a specific criteria on which those variances and deviations are established. So through that process, there were 10 or 11 list of things that came out that people thought that they needed to get deviations from. So there was robust discussion about what are some elements that should have deviations in the code, and those were entered in. But I think a lot of this feedback, why this element remained in our 17 items, is really related to architectural design standards. By fixing the provisions in there to make those guidelines to meet the intent, some of that's going to get addressed this concern. However, we will seek feedback from the developers, see which other standard that they would like flexibility on. And if we can identify which ones those are, then we would look at criteria for the flexibility around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think going back to my earlier comments on the, step backs and balconies and all those different types of things, I think the architectural standards would be a good place to, put in, here's all the different ways that we can make a building look good and, pick whatever, 7 out of 10, whatever the case may be, so that we can, get some variation in things that look good. And also one thing that I would encourage, our staff and our planning commission and council members to do is look at examples of really nicely designed buildings or properties in our area or beyond. One in particular that I really like is District Flats in Woodinville. They have this nice little alleyway with these umbrellas. It's very, very cute. And I would, in my mind, before I saw that, I was like, all 5 of our ones are ugly. But I saw that, I was like, some of them actually look very, very charming and nice. So I would encourage everyone to go look at that and think of, I think how they've designed that and the mixes of people that they have, there's also extremely really good. So definitely look forward to seeing what you come up with on the architectural design side of things. I think on the variances, I think that also, makes sense. You don't want to increase any surface area to recreation for the city. So I'm on board with all that.
Some of the goals I think this would be a goal for this. It would be nice for this incorporated all of our to the extent that we want to be legislating aesthetics. So it would be nice to be within section. We could make trade-offs within a single section as opposed to trying to make trade-offs that are really just we get into the conversation really about. So this would be a nice place to be more goals to allow us to single place. If we are we response for set reasons, we have a clear way to check off the response to certain positive benefits. Figure out.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. We were dealing with the lack of electricity earlier and having.
I don't know.
Hey, you did. Yeah, no, I've been playing it for a little while. Okay, so goals and outcomes chart for this is really, really sparse. And so I think the important things here are recognizing that architectural interest may be achieved through many different methods. It isn't necessarily, the design type style of building that is going to be the most important in deciding whether something has architectural interest. So having a set of options out there would be a really good way of doing it. But I want to make sure then that the goals and outcomes just recognize that if we're making requirements on architectural standards, does limit the creativity of developers and it adds cost to it. So that's an important part of the issue. And then for the goal and outcome is to have options on the methods that you could achieve that.
Absolutely. And, it's all how much time we have and what we're trying to accomplish by the end of 2026. So I think there'll have to be some conscious choices to be made. We'll certainly make it broader, but cognizant of the time it'll take to create ordinances, get all of that adopted if we are going back to redoing the whole design stuff. And so, just sort of be cautious of that. Yeah.
We have a point where we're going to really talk about the schedule as well. So I think we can kind of
and if the idea is to get these in place and then come back if there's more ambitious work plan, then certainly we can do that. But by the end of 2026, I want to be honest in terms of what we can accomplish. We'll have to stay focused without making scope get too big, and which then delays the adoption piece. But certainly, as we have that discussion with PPC, we'll lay it out where things stand and bring.
Yeah, this might be one that I would be willing to push back on a little bit of scope creep, just make sure that if we're going to be making changes to things like step backs and other things, that we really recognize that our goal is to create that visual interest without necessarily naming the method. And so I do think it's really important, especially in these conversations with PPC, that we're able to introduce that as an idea.
Sure.
Yeah, second as well. It's just, if we want to take, if it does become a goal, like we take some of these things that are really aesthetics and lump them together. If the sequencing of that is not correct, it'll be very confusing as a discussion about it. Go back to setbacks, etc. If setbacks are, if having setbacks as a goal itself, then that can go in the calendar. If it's a one of many possible ways that we could be considering trade out costs and benefits or aesthetics versus affordability, that it would make sense to happen with a large discussion. So when we get to the calendar discussion, I think that's going to be a key point that will avoid and go in circles on that whole topic.
Sure. Certainly, they're interconnected, but there's been specific feedback from the development community about step back. So hence it got ranked into the top 2 things that we can easily, quickly get them adopted. So that's where that came from, was this is an issue. It was given as a deviation by council for the TOD project. And so, but that's certainly, if you don't think that can wait, that shouldn't get passed on, you can make that call. But the idea was that there's a low-hanging fruit, let's get them in the books, and there's nothing that prevents us from having a larger conversation at a future date, but quickly getting some of these things done in a timely manner. And
I think either way, we're creating a menu of options. We would want a more flexible step back option in there. And so if we decide of options that's one of them, then we have already done work to understand what values we would agree to.
Yep. Okay. So the other things that are going to happen by the end of this year are through block connectors and peer review pieces. And so for the through block connectors, those are really for pedestrian bike connectivity on the valley floor, while facilitating building placement, and obviously looking into site-specific conditions. The main action here is to provide some more flexibility. The code does have some flexibility, but I think we want to give some examples and look at some of those things. During the last Title 18 update, we had really wide block connector requirements to the order of 40 feet and such. So that seemed too excessive. So we had already narrowed them down and made them similar to our trail width standards. So that effort had already occurred. We do have some flexibility, but we've heard that there needs to be more. And so that's the goal there. For peer review, there's all sorts of things that we send out for peer review, and some of it isn't necessarily rerunning the calculations, but it's doing code review by a third-party consultant because we don't have the staff expertise in that area. Things like lighting and landscaping inspections, we think we can handle those in-house by additional training of our existing staff. But there are other peer reviews such as critical area studies, the geotechnical reports that are really licensed professionals. And given some of the things that we encounter in development here, retaining walls, the safety and stability of people up and down those walls, not just that particular project, but other community members that live around them. Those go through a peer review process. And so our recommend, we'll look at that, look at some of the selection of peer reviewers. We can create a pre-selected consultant list. We'll need to work with legal to make sure the purchasing and all those policies that the cities have to comply with are met, and that also these selected lists can do design as well as review a report. So it will get a little complex, but we wanted to at least tackle that and see what's if that's feasible or not. So that's what we've come up with, these 2 items.
I have a question on the peer review. Are the changes that you are proposing, including the explore if a select list of technical professionals can be created, and eliminating some peer reviews such as lighting and landscaping inspections, are those process changes that you're making, or are they code changes?
Once we figure out how we want to do it, then we'll look at the code to see if any code changes need to be made. We may not need code changes, but depending on the exact language in the code or the fee schedule or something, we may need to look at that. First, figure out what do we want to do, what we can do in-house, what we absolutely need the consultants to do, and then if there are any code changes, then we can do that by ordinance.
Okay. I think my feedback there would be then if we are able to find that this is a process change, a code change, then that, from my perspective, is a priority out of all of this list. And so I'm willing to potentially put that back. Deputy Council President?
Yeah, I guess on the through block connectors, I think, I'm on board with adding flexibility, but I could envision a case where this could go terribly wrong, where it's like, there's one through block connector that's over here, and you have to go like 200 feet along the sidewalk to connect to the next through block connector, and it's a very like disjointed experience for pedestrian or cyclist. So I want to make sure, if we're adding flexibility, it still makes sense if you're walking for 3 different, developments. So that's one thing I want to flag is potentially something we want to be aware of. I think on peer review, I know this is something that there's been a lot of angst about from the home building community. I think generally, I've heard some like architects that they're like, we actually like peer review in some cases because it's nice to have someone else check your work. But I think if they contract with someone to check their work instead of us going out and finding someone to check their work, I think that makes a lot more sense because then they can work with, someone that they know. And so I think, so especially on the geotechnical stuff, I think it's good to have multiple people checking, even if it's not necessarily, it could be like, they get their person and they have someone else to work for. It could be like 2 people in the same work. I'm not really sure how I do, especially on the geotechnical stuff. It is important to have, some level of people checking each other's work. It could be something very major. And, we're talking about massive walls. I think I'm familiar with the one that you're talking about. This is very close to where I'm at. So, yeah, I think in general, I want to make the process more efficient for folks, but not sacrifice anything related to public safety.
Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Yep.
Yeah, last peer review also. I heard some comments from several homeowners on peer review and in particular, and one example that stuck with me was showing set up voices between what they were charged by from their peer review process in Issaquah versus a equivalent process trying to subcontract themselves. And Issaquah was, which is why they were showing it to me, was significant. So that $1,000 to the cost of this single home. Those are those people who are one possibility is trying to specifically require taking to having a small reviewers and having I don't see how we can really say that we would understand what's the state is our needs. So I think that's serious and better. Another I want to bring up is there's some interesting stuff in 2029 that didn't go anywhere. So it has its problems as well. But it's something that staff should look at as and see what some of the goals that are and affect our goals for peer review as well. It has some ways to streamline that I think would be good to take a look at as well.
Sure. Yeah. The city used to do double peer review for properties that were kind of questionable, landslide potential, and this, that. We don't do double peer review anymore already through our implementation. So, but if it's a licensed, certainly, we'll get into all the details on different options, keeping public safety in mind, and ensuring that we have the staff capability as a limitation.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I can say this minor one. This is actually not about it. I think the administration was the geotech that's here, and then the rest. Yeah. So I'm hearing more or less about that committee as well, because I think they want to be flexible. I think we get all to be flexible with the geotech stuff. And so we've now not much. So I think if we go through this and the language we would add, I think there's like geotech off from the rest of evaluation. I'm seeing that on the side. Just say, because this is I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'd want something to happen where there's a landslide and people's homes get swept away because no one checked the geotechnical work. And so I appreciate that. That's what we're trying to do here with
some of is we're worried about consequences that they have. This one.
So then we'll start our next year, 2020. So we'll start 2027 with these two items, buffers, how to incentivize redevelopment of paved areas. So allow expansion. Currently, we allow them to go up, go further away from the buffer. If there's already a building, they can, even if maybe it's in the buffer, but you already have a portion of the building, you can expand on the other side. But looking at expansion towards the critical area with some trade-offs of stormwater improvements and other ecological improvements. If those are done, then what that makes, we will have to take best available science into consideration in order to pass any of these changes. And so we'll work with ecology and our subject matter experts on that. Our idea here is that in central Issaquah, if we can get an inventory of all the wetlands and all the streams, so there isn't a debate, and we know what the buffers are. Of course, they can change after 5 years, so we can keep a better inventory. But we start with that as our basis to help facilitate redevelopment, and then figure out what those. So hence the start date of Q1 2027 to see if we can get some of that inventory work done earlier. Structured parking, retail frontage. Again, how to activate structured parking requirements. I think we heard feedback, art, mural, modulation, all of those things work. It also, if you're exiting and coming in to a public sidewalk, there's also safety things that come into play for cars coming in and out of a parking garage. You probably have seen it in urban areas where you have the mirrors, the bells and whistles, or some sound that alerts people that there are people walking here. So we'll take a look at all of that. But the idea here is not to have a mandate for retail frontage. Still allow it if people want to activate your space, but have other options for activation.
Good.
I was going to say, in terms of the structured parking retail frontage requirement, I don't see how this is any different than like any other blank wall that exists. I know that there was like, can we have this blank wall because there's the bike lane on the inside or whatever. And so I don't think we have to have something specific structured parking. Just like generally outside of the building, we want it to look nice. I don't, we don't necessarily care what's like in the inside, whether it's cars or bikes or residences or whatever the case may be. Generally, and I think we should probably have some kind of similar requirements. Art, mural, ornamentation, modulation, etc. I think fine, and I think generally, perhaps this can also somewhat be the architectural design aesthetic. And then on the mitigate development close to or within buffers, I think generally it makes sense, but I would be very curious to see what specifically the proposal is, because I think, in some cases, the pavement almost like right up to the stream. And also in a lot of cases, that's very, very much like almost within the floodway. So I'd be very curious what you do to expand some viability, restore some habitat, but not make it overly difficult and impossible to build anything because you have to rip out like huge chunks of pavement that already exist. I also think that having a map for all of the wetlands and stream buffers would be very helpful. I think there have been cases where someone bought a piece of property and then they're like, oh, there's this wetland over here, so you can't build as much. And it would have been nice, time. I will also say, and this is a little random, but there is a property for sale that I've seen on Zillow that advertises that it's a large flat lot, but the entire thing is covered by a fishery and stream. And I think that's not like immediately transparent. I think we could make it really easy for people to be able to tell, like, oh yeah, obviously this is not something where we want people to be building housing. But, areas where we actually do, which is like, within the Issaquah, not next to, immediately next to a fishery stream that is currently like a meadow, so an existing parking lot. I think we should, have a map that makes it forever.
I think the goals on this are written really well, and it does a good job of explaining what the problem is, which is that previous standards allowed this parking to be built really close to stream buffers, and thus when the buffer amount changed, you have this area that just can't be adjusted, and thus it's bad for the streams and the ecological wildlife. So I really appreciate the way that this is written. I would just add as action is that map of properties, because I think that part of it is particularly useful out of it. And then I really appreciate understanding that this will require working with ecology, and we know that that is not a fast process. So while I generally agree that this is an important area for unlocking development on the valley floor, I recognize the time commitment that will be required for that, as well as creating that map. And so I agree with your timeline.
Yeah, and because some of our streams are all, well, we'll get to the nitty-gritty details in a future conversation, but yeah, thank you. So moving on. So the other thing in Q1 of next year is going to be more options for sustainable development standards. So we know that affordable housing projects have to meet this evergreen sustainable development standard. So obviously we don't want them to get another certification. So we certainly want to include that. I think I heard some comments from you all by email to allow other options like non-fossil stuff. So we'll look into all of those. We obviously want to make it easy and simple, give people options. But sustainability is a big goal of the city, and a lot of our long-range plans, including climate action plan, including a comprehensive plan, have targets that we are all striving to meet. And so that's usually happens with a combination of trees, solar panels and chargers and all of that gets bundled up with getting this LEED certification piece. So, but we'll certainly explore different options. From a building standpoint, concrete is a heavy generator of greenhouse gas emissions, not just the heating and all those kind of things. So that's why I think this gets complex. I think in the past when we said we would give people a choice of how many points you want to add up, and when we dug into it, some of the cities that do it, the outcome is the same, but a lot of time was spent on creating a city-owned process. So we wanted to make it simple. So we adopted this LEED Platinum certification piece. But we'll have a deeper conversation with Planning and Policy Commission and our sustainability staff around this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an issue that I had flagged last year. I think I did find it weird because it's like you can, if you're residential, you have to be LEED Platinum, but if you're mixed, you have to be like Go Green 5-star. So
it's the other way around. So
okay,
people haven't people like Built for Green Star is a Master Builder Association program, and a lot of housing development that has happened. It's worked really well for the home builders, for the Master Builder Association and the city. So we haven't received any negative feedback around that.
Yeah, I think we should just give a full menu of like other cities like Bellevue, where they're like, hey, here's like the 5 different ones that are all kind of comparable in terms of environmental performance. I think that's good. And you mentioned in your earlier email, lenders will give people preferential interest rates.
That's what we heard from one developer.
This is true because my company actually runs that program for one of the big national GSEs. But this is the thing. I will say also, I would love an option where it's like, if you don't want to get a green building certification, but we can decide, hey, actually, we care about climate action. So if you go, no field connection building, then you don't have to go through the trouble of paying a consultant to get your certification, which I think would be a great option as well. And I know that's something you're considering with the sustainability. So I'm very glad to hear that and very interested to know that.
So towards the latter part of 2027 is this large project called Impact Fee, right sizing the impact fee. This one, of course, requires a lot of conversations internally because it's the traffic impact. This is also parks impact and where the city is in its long-term planning efforts that, should or could be done before an impact study is done. So we'll need to have a lot of discussions internally between various city departments to flesh this one out a little bit more. But the basic goal here is to right size the impact fees for new growth to ensure that they are paying their pro rata share of funding the city's capital facilities. And then the potential use of AI, technology is changing in the blink of an eye. The city has a group that is meeting regularly around AI and generally. We're focused on workflow processes and how to improve those. And for permitting, there are ongoing conversations with eCityGov Alliance about the permitting software part that has some potential to look into this further. But that's a much larger, bigger piece, cost-wise as well as time-wise. But in the interim, we can explore options for completeness reviews. So we are working on really very clear guidance to applicants about what a complete application is, what you need, and if we could have some sort of a system that could scan those when an application comes in and to make and flag this is incomplete, maybe something we can look into. Also, chatbots and frequently asked questions has been tried by various cities, so we can certainly look into creating that option. And of course, updating our website, the permitting software website, will go a long ways, where people can search Google searches through Google and, other AI's searches that will lead them to the right direction and pinpoint them in the right direction for permitting. So I think that concludes. Again, any feedback that you have for us is welcome.
Very briefly on impact fees, we can maybe get to this in calendar discussions too if we go there. But I do want to be cognizant of the public comment that we received on the relative time frame when we might want to address impact fees, and also elsewhere that this is one of the more important things. I don't have a good sense of all stakes, so I don't want to push it on that too much. But if we're hearing feedback, this is more important, and I want to take that into account when we're trying to schedule this.
Yeah, my understanding in the impact fee was we would have to spend money to retain a consultant, and that's not within the budget for this year. Although I do remember we did allocate $50,000 towards some kind of housing thing so we could potentially repurpose that to retain a consultant on the impact fee thing. Again, I don't know how much the impact fee will cost, but I do think something where it expedite. This is one item where it is a very direct cost, like a fee that we're charging. And I think previously I'd reviewed the schedule that we'd used to impact fee previously, and one of the big ticket projects on that was the multimodal identity processing, which we now know costs upwards of $100 million. And that's included in what we're using for transportation impact fees. And so, I do think it is worth revisiting what projects we think are actually going to be constructed, how much do we even think is reasonable that the city could be contributing to that, and adjust accordingly. So definitely forward to see what we can do to expedite the impact fee study.
I will add in here, I think when I first came into the housing conversation, I was very interested in making sure that we were adjusting impact fees as one of our priorities. I think recognizing that it was not in the previous budget, we'll have to establish the money for this, that it impacts, our CIP and potential grant areas, all of that. And also recognizing that there are a lot of process changes and just being more friendly to development and, allowing variances and things like that that are going to make development more likely to happen. I think I'm actually okay with this at the timeline that was presented. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the timeline is okay if there's absolutely nothing we can do to move it up. I think we could definitely see if this is the absolute case that we could do this impact fee study. I'd be curious to see if there's, anything we can do to expedite. So, City Administrator.
Well, we can do anything. I think it's a matter of priority. There are multiple parties within the city involved. So, who are working on other things right now. So, if the council really feels strongly about this, we may need to get an intermediate step to bring this on topic to the full council and lay out. We think it would need to do this. It is, it evolves, it's intertwined with so many other things. Those dollars change, they have ripple effects. Many other things, but as a part of the council that we want to move up, I think this committee has to make that decision, and then perhaps send this one piece back to the full council to have this discussion. And we've started to tee it up, and it is difficult. I think some through tonight's conversation, the council policy here, in some cases, substantial. So the other years on the government should have to align. It's just going to be a big one. So, and then committee, take a more temperature. It is something maybe like to accelerate and elaborate. Science back to the council. I think we could schedule a discussion. So that's the point. 60 days.
So I think my preference would be to put my thumb on creating architectural design standard options. I think that is a more important change from this committee than necessarily moving up a conversation about impact fees. But I would love to hear from committee members.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the architectural piece is going to be a lot of work. So, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know without knowing, what else would have to be sacrificed if we were to move this item up. And I don't know how much effort it would take for you to come up with kind of a preliminary sense of what that would be that we could perhaps discuss in our next meeting.
We would have
Okay.
But I mean, I don't want to say no. I just want to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Our colleagues, have various patients because of studies that are required, because of vertical impacts on projects, so there's that are already there's a lot. But hearing and studio, I think, is important. We're trying to solve that. We don't want to. We want to be out. And our architecture standards, that's complicated, but it's contained. Everything is possible.
Councilmember,
I don't think they really have enough to say a very well informed opinion. I've heard some feedback from the home builder, this is one of the more important things. So I'm taking that into account. The impact of the board is not. So that's related to the additional impact. That's the other question I would want to understand is there, what are the class things that we would be trading off? Is it, Councilor Walsh brought up standards, but it's not a trade-off. Is it a binary trade-off between these two things? Is there something else? Is there, so I guess my question would be, if could we see some options to move this forward? Could we see what the realm of possibilities of moving this forward would look like? Would be understanding that something has to shift, and what shifts those would most likely have to be based on your understanding of the relative work required for all of these different things. And just have a couple of reasonable proposals that we could look through. Otherwise, I don't quite know how to give. I don't know how to give at the moment without that. So, I appreciate you cannot do that in 2 weeks. I don't know how long it would take to do that. But if we do want to move it up, that's the kind of thing that we would have to understand.
I think the other piece, and I have to find my document again, is just when we're looking at impact fees, I want to better understand the whole sense of, okay, right now we recognize the direct costs to builders. There's also, if something is built, we don't get property taxes, retail sales tax, and B&O tax, and all of those other things. And so, from my perspective, in order to consider whether or not our impact fees are reducing our revenue, reducing home building, increasing costs of building, I would need to also understand what our revenue picture should look like if we weren't including those. So some modeling on what areas of revenue might go up. And so I would really see this as a fairly complex set of conversations and calculations and intertwined impacts, is my perspective.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is going to be complex, and I think to Wally's point, we want to have some of those, conversations earlier about what the park projects are on the list, what are transportation projects on the list that maybe. So those conversations will take a little bit of time, and then the methodology for calculating your impact fees has to be done right, because it is something that can be looked at and should be done correctly. So in order to do a good job, this is an aggressive schedule, what we put together. We will need this much time to get some of those earlier pieces done. However, if this needs to be moved up based on your direction, then we'll have to take that into consideration, come back and have a deeper conversation around schedule.
So perhaps we do this so that those guys have discussions of what the next step looks like. And if we could convince it, we would provide an update. I think they need to I don't have the meeting dates memorized.
In July, I'm not sure if we will have PPC materials coming to PDE in July. Yeah, not in July. And August is a council break. You guys don't meet in August.
Yeah, and I think there's controversial too. And I think it was one cadence maybe we can take all this information, do our best. If we have progress in 2 weeks, so be it. Otherwise, I convince you at least check in at the July meeting. But I think the operator is evolved in order to keep this up. And also to connect the folks in this room just to keep things moving. So, but I appreciate the conversation on the impact fees, the architecture standards. So those are the two things. Is there anything else that everything's important, but
Parking, architectural standards, and impact fees is what I heard.
I guess I would say the architectural standards is probably the one area where there's the least clarity in terms of what it would look like going forward. I think on the other ones, it is, we have some pretty clear guidance. And so I think that's what warrants us, spending some more time diving into those.
So that, there were multiple meetings in September, October, November. That's something we should start looking at. I don't think we would be ready prior to that. But I think like September, if we want the committee, we need to look at twice a month meetings, September, October, November.
Yeah, we would just like to see, because if I look at the PD review of items on September 1st to cover fluoride ratio, MFTE, parking requirements, natural contact, transparency, and multi-communication in GCOM. That's a lot. So I think we were already, the feedback was going to be, we're going to need to make adjustments on how we are getting that information. That being said, I don't see necessarily a date in here in October or November for things to come to EDE. The next date that you're showing for PD review is December 1st. So I think doing more of a breakdown on when this would come to EDE and if we need to have meetings and how we're handling some of these bigger items would be a great next step there. Go ahead.
I guess on the impact fees in particular, I guess I'm curious when is the timing of when it gets paid to the city, right?
Okay. So the impact fees get paid at the issuance of the building permit. Sometimes the residential folks can ask for an extension to certificate of occupancy. So the code allows folks to request an extension. We sometimes get those because the impact doesn't start until people start living in there. So the state law was changed to allow that type of a time frame for folks to pay it at the time of when they're given occupancy. And to the point of, if council desires to provide some relief in the interim, we haven't done an inflationary increase because every year we can do an inflationary increase because we were trying to do when the study is going to happen and all that. So that can be paused until the study is complete. So that may provide some relief in the interim of not getting that whatever percentage that's based on the building cost index. That is published by Engineering News, then we look at that and we do an inflationary increase. So we can pause that until the study is complete.
I guess just to put a finer point on it, because what I was trying to get at is, I'm pretty sure the there's probably one specific builder who, there's only one builder that I think of that would potentially be interested in getting a building permit before Q3 of 2027, which would be the market rate developer of the TOD project. And so if not having a lower, I don't know, because my understanding is that we're going to be revisiting impact fees and not likely reducing them. There's no, and they're just going to wait what happens before they submit a building permit, right?
Well, it depends on the carrying costs. If they're paying loan, then every builder wants to get it in the ground and start getting their revenue as soon as possible. So impact fees are, your soft costs are less than 2% of your overall project costs. So there's a lot of money spent on buying the land, construction loans, and all of that. Those add up. So time is essential for them to not wait for $1 million relief in impact fees, if that, right?
My understanding is also that they have not purchased that half of the project yet. And so anyway, definitely something for us to keep in mind is that, with the TOD project, we want to make sure that both the affordable and market rate side of things are moving. If we're thinking about what potentially is the impact of moving this impact fee, it could be that, okay, then, they're actually being built in parallel, which would be great.
Okay, So we're kind of coming down to the end of all of this. I think we've given a lot of feedback. I'd like to know what the next steps are, particularly on the goals and outcomes charter. You know, we've given some feedback around goals, issues, outcomes, actions, things like that. Who sees that next?
We can take the feedback that we have today and try and revise the golden outcome chart and include it in your packet for next meeting, which the packet go out soon, but we'll give it a shot. See, it's fresh in our memory. We've had this discussion, so if you can capture some of your feedback in that.
What else?
We're bringing the step backs and the outdoor amenity space and some other clarifying code amendments.
That's coming from PPC.
Yes.
Okay, I think that will be a good pairing because it will be important when we're evaluating the proposed actions almost to make sure that they align with the goals and outcomes of that. Okay, so that's the next step of that. And we don't have necessarily a time certain of when you're going to come back on any schedule changes or kind of how you might rearrange some of the other areas.
What's the July date?
PDE July date?
Yeah.
July 7th.
Awesome.
Let's see. Yes, July 7th, and our calendar currently says open accepting agenda items.
And that's a Tuesday. Because we avoided the, I know I think on Monday.
Yeah.
Seattle. Right. So I think we can do that. So we can have some discussion on the impact fees. I think during the month of June we can at least convene on meeting of multiple parties.
Yep.
Kristen, you're looking skeptical. Okay.
I'm just trying to hear.
I just want to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we're adding something and making requests and all of that. So then it sounds like we've got something coming back to us at our next meeting in June, which is a review of the goals and outcomes changes, and then everything that's coming from PBC. And then the July meeting, looking at some of these bigger areas where we've asked for some adjustments on the administrative standards and impact fees, how you might fit it in along with a calendar of how we can address some things that might need to shift for that.
We'll give it our purpose.
Absolutely. Let us know if you run into conflict on that, we need to shift dates. I'm just explaining the conversation out there. Okay. Anything else, folks? Okay. I think that's it. Any announcements? No, we're good. Hey, we did this for a power outage. The transformer. Good job, everybody. I will mark us closed at 9:01 p.m. Thank you. Oh my goodness. You people and your
down by one.
yeah.
City clerk's office. Doesn't matter if there's no power. You know.
Oh my God.
Cool.